Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining today's MarSocSci webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emma McKinley. I'm the founder and chair of the Marine Social Science Network, we are a community of researchers, of practitioners, all trying to understand and explore and better figure out the complex relationships between society, the ocean, coasts and seas, and also think about what that means in terms of how we can better manage our ocean, our coastlines, and feed that into policy. So really crucial things right now, and really important as we, as I said, reflect on the fact that we've just had World Ocean Day. We are in a very busy week for the ocean. So today we have Dr Diz Glithero from the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, who's going to talk to us about the amazing work that's been being done on ocean literacy in Canada. So we'll start off with Diz giving a short presentation, and then, as I said, come on to a more interactive discussion and answer session. If you can pop your questions, if you don't want to come on as a panelist, if you can pop your questions into the Q&A box, that's great. But as I said, if you're happy to come on and be recorded as more of a meeting, then let me know in the chat box and I will I'll add you on. If you'd like to tweet or live post while we're going, please tag in MarSocSci, so at MarSocSci and hashtag MarSocSci or hashtag Team MarSocSci. I'll pop all of this in the chat box in a second. And yeah, with that, I'd like to really welcome Diz and thank you so much for coming along and for joining us this morning for you. And I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Emma. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and join the MarSocSci Society and network, and just to be part of hopefully what will be a great conversation today. I'm joining you from Chelsea, Quebec, Canada, which is about 20 minutes outside of Ottawa, our nation's capital. And I'm on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And we are in the middle of an unprecedented heat wave. It's about 39 degrees right now, which in Canada in springtime is very unusual. So if I start sweating profusely, I'm not nervous. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm hot, but I would love, as Emma said, to share with you. This is a great opportunity to share with you some of the work we're doing here in Canada around ocean literacy. It's been a national project for the last 2 years, and just share kind of what we did, how we did it, why we did it, some of the challenges, lessons learned along the way, and where we're at now, and kind of looking ahead both domestically and globally, and ways to really contribute to and intersect with a lot of the great work happening in the marine social science community globally. So I will share my screen right now, and hopefully all will go smoothly here. And here we go. Okay. So just move right along. So the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, it was started 2 years ago. And what's unique about it, it started just in an informal conversation amongst ocean education NGOs in Canada, museums, science centers, researchers, some government folks who are just trying to get a better pulse of what's happening in Canada around ocean literacy. I think collectively we all recognize that there were things happening, but very fragmented, very uncoordinated, and in many ways quite competitive with one another, fighting for the same small pots of funding. And out of that came an alliance. So we're not a legal entity. We're not a new NGO. It's just an alliance of existing organizations and communities and institutions that have come together. We started as 12. We're now over 400. And you know, the best way to describe it, it's an independent national project office. But in not being our own legal entity, we have to administratively, and certainly from an accounts or financial management point of view, be nested within some form of legal entity. So Ocean Networks Canada, which is a large NGO nested within the University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada, is our administrative home. And we follow a community established mandate, which essentially is, you know, really to catalyze that national momentum and streamline coordinated action. It's also because myself as national lead are based in Ottawa, or just outside of Ottawa. It allows for the smaller local and regional voices to kind of streamline together in coordinated messages at a national level, which has proven to be quite helpful. So just quickly, timeline, you know, when we launched back in September 28 at the G7 ministerial meetings when Canada was hosting those, that was a great launch to really give kind of ocean literacy, which was certainly in the margins of kind of language and discourse here in Canada, brought it into the spotlight. People still scratching their head, but at least, the term was out there on a national stage, which was very helpful. And then we moved into a year-long national study, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And that was really to gather a sense of what is happening and an evidence-based understanding upon which we would then move into stage 3, which would be to co-develop a national strategy based on those findings, and then move into the implementation phase of the strategy, which is where we are now. So in terms of the national study, I mean, as many of you know, Canada is a massive country geographically, and yet not so big in terms of population. But what's really unique about Canada is how regionally diverse we are. And so we wanted to do a national study, yet at the same time, take a very place-based approach. So you can see in the outer ring of the framework there, we had regional coordinators. So there was 5 regional coordinators, one for each of the really distinct regions in Canada: Pacific, Atlantic, the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence, which in many ways is kind of the fourth coastline in Canada. And then inland Canada, where over 30 million of Canada's 38 million Canadians live nowhere near the ocean. So that became really an important demographic to engage in this work. The other interesting thing about our approach is we wanted to look at ocean literacy beyond just an ocean knowledge lens. And although the widely accepted definition there at the bottom of an understanding of ocean's influence on you, your influence on the ocean, is important, and we certainly embrace that. But for us, it's a lot more in the sense that we really wanted to explore ocean values and ocean action, in the sense that, my background as an educator and a teacher educator in the Faculty of Education at the University of Ottawa is, we don't often act on what we know, we act on what we feel, and those values that drive a sense of agency and the skills to drive change. And so we really want to bring those other dimensions into our exploration of ocean literacy. And then we also wanted to look at it beyond just an education and youth lens. We wanted to see it across all those different sectors: NGOs, health, media, industry, get a much more holistic understanding of what this term actually meant across sectors, across regions. And so, we had great take up, more than we expected, over 3,000 Canadians, 400 organizations. You can see the different mixed method approach we use in terms of collecting data. So targeted interviews, we had asset mapping at an organizational level, national surveys, national polls, media scans, kind of put all this collection of data together. And through that, it wasn't surprising that there was unique regional findings. Of course, we expected to see those. But what was encouraging to see is when we put all the 5 regional reports and sets of findings together, there were some clearly common national priorities identified. And some were, probably ones we would have known going into it, the need to strengthen ocean education in Canada. We don't have a national curriculum in Canada. It's provincial and territorial based. But even across those provincial territorial levels, there's little ocean content in the curriculum, amplifying youth engagement. So some were very specific and fairly known going in, but others, were new to get a sense of, where people saw priorities. And for example, in terms of just much better integration at our federal government level between water, ocean, and climate literacy, for example, or in a country right now that's in the midst of, reconciliation, really coming to terms with our history of colonization of Indigenous people in the country. Like, what does ocean literacy moving forward look like in the context of reconciliation? So there was a lot of interesting priorities that came forward that really shaped the direction going into the co-development phase of the national strategy. In terms of just a few findings, I thought that might be interest to a broader than Canada audience is just the one thing we asked, and we asked it with over 1,000 folks who did a survey that were what we called more of an ecosystem survey, because they were people who would probably self-identify as being somewhat ocean engaged, working in an ocean sector directly or related in some way. And then we had similar questions put out through a independent polling organization in Canada with a random sampling of the public. And what's really neat to see, comparing the two, is the number one way Canadians self-identified as learning about the ocean was through media, more so than any training, schooling, museums, and what have you. The other part that was interesting is then when we put some statements out there in terms of, do you identify Canada as an ocean nation? Or are you willing to make lifestyle changes to support ocean health? Or the ocean plays an important role in Canada's economy. There was very little to no difference between those two different sets, sampling sets, which was interesting. But when it came down, kind of the two questions that are really at the core of ocean literacy, the statements of my day-to-day actions impact the ocean, or the ocean directly impacts my day-to-day activities, there was an enormous gap, going from about 92% in the ocean engaged community to less than 50% in the random sampling of the Canadian public. So we were able to see, certainly where some gaps were, and then also just surprised by some other findings. So that was interesting. And this survey and poll gives us a nice baseline, at the start of the UN decade as to where ocean perceptions and values are in Canada, and we'll be able to see how that changes throughout the course of the decade. So in terms of, study, if there's anything about those, regional findings or the national reports from that study, they're all on our website. And, like many projects, I think that take a place-based approach, this is one of those projects where if you were to just read the national report, you'd miss, I think, the essence of what ocean literacy in Canada is, because it's really in the regional reports where you see those true kind of stories and relationships with the ocean and the community-driven solutions to just addressing some of these needs and priorities that were identified. So we took all those findings, all those regional recommendations, those commonly identified national priorities, and that took us into a phase from about this time last year until January. So about a 7-month phase where we, through a very iterative process, being, I guess in some ways it was both our blessing and a curse, being an alliance of organizations that's driven by a community established mandate. It means that you have to ensure that everyone's being heard and ensure that, the extreme spectrum of diversity is all being captured, and that there's a consensus across, what is being co-drafted in the strategy. So it was an exhausting iterative process, but also really, quite profound and transformative in many ways, because, people felt like they were truly co-creating a national strategy from the bottom up. And just the word cloud here is interesting, and I believe a colleague of mine, Sarah McNeil, may be part of this, and if she is, she's going to drop a few publications just into the chat room there if they're of interest. But one of the biggest challenges was just the term itself, ocean literacy. And, it was really perceived across the country as being a very limiting term, particularly for our Indigenous cultures across Canada. It was seen very academic, very elitist. It was also seen as a modern concept for something that's always been known and understood for thousands of years by Inuit and First Nations. What's unique in Canada is, many know, I'm sure, we've got the longest coastline in the world of any country, but 70% of that coastline is completely occupied by Indigenous communities. And so they have been the stewards of that, that coastline and marine environments for thousands of years, and 50% of the coastlines in the Arctic. So an academic term or a term using government like ocean literacy doesn't resonate. And so, trying to capture the different words that different groups of people and communities are using across the country that still get at that essence of our relationship with the ocean. And so a national strategy was created and launched just this past March, which was an exciting milestone to get to. We've been kind of head down for 2 years, and to reach that was quite exciting. And what I'll do, maybe best way to share what the strategy is all about is just to play you here a 2-minute video. So let me just... So hopefully that video played through okay. And yeah, so in terms of the strategy, so we're right now, at that phase of, you reach that milestone, the focus has been there, for the past years to launch and to create and launch that strategy. And now we move into the implementation phase, which in many ways, the hard work is now just starting and trying to figure out, I'll go back for a second, with those 9 action streams, although they directly reflect and address the priorities that were identified, those national priorities from the study phase, what's both, I think, an opportunity and a challenge is these 9 action streams. Some of them are very straightforward. They're very specific projects, like creating a microgrant program for communities. It's very tangible. There's an easy pathway kind of forward for it. And others, for example, improving access and diversity, across, access to blue spaces, increasing diversity within Canada's very different ocean-related sectors. That's a much broader and less obvious kind of path forward. So we're in that stage right now of just figuring out, which action streams get moving quickly, which ones will take more time. There isn't going to be a standard approach to move to a pathway for action for each one of these. And so it's a unique time right now as we start to mobilize. And what we're trying to do in terms of pathways for action is we want a national stream of coordinated action. And those are our 9 action teams. So creating a very diverse cross-section of individuals from across the country, leaders in their own sectors to really champion different action streams. And then at the same time, though, we're so mindful that, the real, I think, moving of the needle, of ensuring that level of community engagement happens will need to take place on the ground in communities where culturally appropriate, locally relevant, place-based approaches are used. And so that's kind of our coast tracker that we're using. Just to give you a sense, so there's been a few pieces of the action streams that right upon launching in March are already moving very quickly. So Ocean Week Canada, which taking place right now, an action team came together within days and have within a short 2-month period created a national program that's taking place this week with dozens of events across the country, both at a national and community level, which is great. And it's an example of, a type of action project that's directly coming out of the strategy and informing what we're calling, public narrative outcomes, because when we think of where we want the strategy to have impact over 10 years, if we look in the context of the decade, we do want to shift the public narratives in Canada, like the notion that Canadians do identify as an ocean nation, an ocean culture. There's also another example. We've just received funding to launch a project starting this week, Streams to Sea, which is a community science journalism project to capture community stories of a changing ocean and some of the solutions that they are initiating at a community level to help address these changes and ensure thriving community livelihoods. And so, those types of projects will help create those broader knowledge and capacity outcomes that we're wanting to see. And then also launched yesterday, it's been a busy week, is the coalition was a partner in editing the Canadian Journal of Environmental Education, a special issue on ocean literacy, which is the first ocean literacy reader in Canada. So, the broader outcome that comes out of projects like this will be to help inform research and policy outcomes. So just as a final slide here, all this has happened. It's happened so fast, and at such a pace, we're just having a chance now to kind of digest and ask those questions. What have we learned? What now? Where do we go? And, to what end goal? Part of it is starting to then now need to look beyond Canada. We've kind of had our head down, looking very domestically and very regionally and locally to get a sense of ocean literacy in Canada. And now it's to move that, where we're at and what we've learned outwards. And I think, part of it in the context of the decade, and as many of you know, that there's 7 societal outcomes, with the last one being an inspiring and engaging ocean, of which obviously ocean literacy situates itself well inside that outcome. It certainly impacts the others, but that's the big one. And so, we're asking ourselves in Canada, the questions around how will the global community, for example, or IOC, UNESCO, and some of the real champions of the decade work, what's the evaluation framework for that? How will we know in 2030 that we've achieved success and we've moved the needle on an aspiring and engaging ocean? And, and it's the same thing, we're asking in Canada too, like, how are we going to measure the impact of this strategy and all these different action projects? What are those indicators we'll be using to measure progress and then impact along the way? The other thing too, we're exploring and asking ourselves a lot about is how do we streamline efforts? There's so much going on, and often it's overlapping, it's perhaps duplicating, it's, and somewhat still competing for those same kind of pots of money. And yet at the end, we're all heading towards the same end goal. And so really trying to be mindful in a lot of co-created, collaborative, and joint funded initiatives to ensure that, we're maximizing both resources and reach and impact as we go. So maybe I'll stop there. I know it's a whirlwind of a project that everyone here is at arm's length away from, but would love to open it up for conversation and explore, some of the work that you're doing and how that intersects with ocean literacy, as well as answer any questions specific to the project here in Canada. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
That's great, Diz. Thank you so much. So firstly, just as a reminder to our attendees, we are a relatively small group. So if you would like to come on screen to ask your question, then please let me know in the chat and I can change your role in the session. That's no problem. Diz, thank you so much. We've talked about this work that you've done a couple of times, and I have experienced similar challenges in terms of the language and the terminology around ocean literacy, and we've talked about that and what that might mean. And I think that the work that's been done in Canada has been so fabulous to see that kind of recognition of the diversity of communities, diversity of audiences, and not just trying to engage people in one method, really using those mixed approaches. I know you didn't touch on it much in your presentation, but from seeing previous presentations and knowing what's in the report and in the journal, there were really some really creative ways of engaging communities. And I think that's so important when we think about how we better understand how people connect. And what you said earlier is that we don't often act on what we know, we act on what we feel. For me, that is really what's driven my kind of evolution of the understanding of ocean literacy and marine stewardship, marine citizenship, and what we're actually trying to understand. Like, we're actually trying to understand the connection. It's not about necessarily the knowledge, although of course that's hugely important, and knowledge can mean different things in itself anyway. Different ways of knowing are really crucial, and I think that place-based and co-creation approach that's been taken through the coalition has been fantastic to see. Building on that, Eski's put a question in the Q&A box about what's next. So I suppose it kind of draws on that conversation that's been happening, the debate around ocean literacy. It's been around for 20 years as a term. It's obviously evolving, it's changing. But Eski's question is, what next? What's next or beyond ocean literacy? Are we experiencing a second wave of ocean literacy, and what might that look like? For example, moving from knowledge to values and action.
Leave it to Iski to ask that question. Yeah, the $1 million question. In the context of Canada, in many ways, it's been brought up and pointed out by a lot of our Indigenous collaborators on this project that in many ways, the term ocean literacy, the work being done around it, and this strategy, for example, in Canada, it's almost an intervention for non-Indigenous people so that we catch up to what they know already. And, I think I hold that very dear, because I think it really is that, at least in the context of Canada. I mean, for our coastal First Nations, Inuit, and interior First Nations and Métis people, like, there's the worldviews and cultural systems that are grounded in an ecological orientation, right? So they understand this relationship. And I think a lot of what we're trying to do in the work of ocean literacy is to cultivate those personal connections, to create opportunities for experiences that make so much of the issues more personal, more visceral, so that there's a personal relationship with these issues, these changing yeah, just changing ecosystems and seeing our part in that. So I think, creating those opportunities is essential. And then it's, yeah, that, I think that's where you start to get that emotional, the kind of catalyst to help drive the change, but then it's that capacity building, right? It really, and I actually don't like that term much, but in terms of, right, it really is, it's developing those skills and having access to opportunities, equal access to opportunities to really start to, develop and exchange the training and needs that we need to move forward. So it means this spectrum, right? And it's not this linear path. That's the other thing we've talked a lot about. It's not like from X to Y to Z and we're ocean literate and we'll see the changes. It really is kind of an ecosystem of actors and an ecosystem of actions that need to happen. And in different places in our country, certain things need to be happening more than others, and different skills need to be cultivated more there. And, so it's trying to all zoom in and step back, zoom in and step back in this accordion interaction.
I'll unmute. Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy, actually, because I think that's one of the challenges that I've definitely come up against when we're talking about getting funding for ocean literacy projects. And they go, well, how are you going to upscale it? You're like, well, what we're suggesting here might not work there. So we might not want to upscale it. We might want to look at what's kind of location specific. And again, kind of feeding back to that place-based approach, that co-creation idea that you've developed. And I know that, as you said, it's the hard work is only really just beginning now with the implementation phase and what comes next. And I think it'd be great to see how that momentum continues through Canada and how that keeps going. There's another question from Judy. Hi, Judy. Again, kind of building on Iski's question around the terminology. We keep coming back to this. Every time you and I talk, we come back to this question. Did you find any better terms for ocean literacy amongst Indigenous communities?
Yeah, it's a great question, Judy. And I hope, I think Sarah will drop into the chat. There's, in the publication that was released yesterday, one of the articles is called Coming to Terms with Ocean Literacy. And that would be, although it's Canadian specific, it would be a great article to read, because what it gets into the heart of the tensions that we had, and both from an Indigenous perspective, but also from a language, like being a country like with two official bilingual, with French and English, it's so much is done in English and then translated to French, and you just miss, it's not the same. And so those tensions came out. In terms of, was there a better term? Some people thought a better term emerged, but in terms of consensus, did a better term emerge? Definitely not. Ocean relationships or ocean relationship, definitely for me was a term that resonated, because that was for sure how Indigenous people were hearing. It's all about relationship, to land, to water, to the ocean, with community, with each other, with past generations, future generations. So you can, that relationship is essential, I think. For others, yeah, I mean, you could see the different sectoral hats being worn. So in government, like marine citizenship, we heard lots about. In terms of educators, it was connection, ocean connections, right? And so, yeah, to me, I just hold that Wordle map up, because they all have a place, and it's almost trying to hold space for all of those terms, knowing that they're important.
I think that's really, really great way of thinking about it. I think I probably got myself a bit tied up in knots sometimes about the terminology, and actually it might be that different phrases, different concepts work for different groups, but actually they're all, as you said at the beginning, kind of striving and working towards that same goal, and that's really what's important, I suppose. Yeah, I think that's a really, I love the Wordle. I might have to borrow it.
Well, a lot, and a lot of people brought up, we could spend 2 more years just trying and getting stuck on the term, and really it doesn't matter, because they all intersect. There's an interplay between all of them. So let's hold space so that we honor them and move them alongside with our work, but let's not get stuck there. Let's try to move forward.
Yeah, and I think just while we're waiting for a couple more questions to come in, I think some of your findings and some of the points you made around kind of expanding what we mean by ocean literacy came up through some of the work that Daryl Bardon and I did, and I know Daryl's on the call as well, where we looked at some of the existing models of ocean literacy, of marine citizenship, of ocean connectedness, different things, and thought about what the different dimensions that are currently talked about, and thought, you know, are they kind of fit for purpose? Is there scope for us to really capitalize on the fact that ocean literacy is being talked about so much in these policy spheres that it wasn't being 10 years ago, even 5 years ago? This wasn't happening. So it's a real opportunity, I hope, for positive change. And maybe there's a chance for us to use that momentum to, like you said, build expertise. Maybe it's not just about, you know, the knowledge side. It's about raising awareness of the opportunities from a career perspective for younger generations. It's about helping people. So one of the dimensions obviously is that knowledge idea, but maybe knowledge isn't about knowledge of the ocean. It's about knowledge of how to get engaged, or how to be involved in decision making, or, you know, that we can expand what we mean by that. And it'd be great to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been at the heart of, you know, what we've been trying to do, and now to really have kind of real terms articulation of what are these different, you know, arms of ocean literacy. And, you know, and to give a tangible example, like there's a great program that's just been launched this spring by an NGO in Canada called the NGO Students on Ice. And in the past, for 20 years, they've taken expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctica with not just Canadian youth, but youth around the world, to really see firsthand the changing polar ecosystems, and to cultivate that sense of, you know, agency in young people to be part of the solution. And they've just launched in the last few months the Blue Futures Pathway. And it's all about, you know, what you were just describing there, Emma, is recognizing that, you know, and a great example too. So 50% of our coastline, 35% of our landmass is in the Arctic, yet less than 1% of our population is there. But half of that population, more than half, is under the age of 25. So you have this incredibly young, talented, connected, you know, generation to the ocean, to the land, to the Arctic ecosystem, which we all know globally is such an important, and yet access to opportunities, you know, being able to be part of the leadership or the decision making around, you know, projects or initiatives that are going to happen in communities or happen in the North or want to, but you know, so I think part of it is cultivating those opportunities, support youth adult partnerships, so that young people develop skills, training, you know, relationships, mentors that will really help them be an actor in what's to come. And so like that's an, you know, example. And I think that definitely is ocean literacy work. I mean, we kind of use it as this broad term. And I think, as you said, there's momentum behind it more so now than ever. So rather than get stuck on the term or what exactly it means, I think anything that's really trying to, you know, cultivate that connection, and then capacity in people to be part of not just the civic responsibility side of things, but the actual civic action that will lead to change, and is all part of the greater ocean literacy work.
Yeah, and I think some of the conversations that we're having here in the UK are around how that can be done in a cross-policy area. Like, so how can we work to gain multiple benefits across different areas of work? So, you know, when Iski did her talk a little while ago, we talked about the benefits from a health and well-being perspective, and could ocean literacy be used as a way of harnessing social prescribing to get people out into nature and accessing blue spaces, as you mentioned earlier. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us to continue those conversations, hopefully in the next 10 years, but also beyond that as well. We've had a couple of other questions coming in, so I'm going to go with someone who's not said her name. So thank you so much for the hard work, and congrats on the special issue. Interested in learning a bit more about the action streams, and how could somebody who's based in Canada get involved, and what would commitment look like? So for example, they've mentioned action stream 8, which is improved government integration of water, ocean and climate literacy. That one. How might you envision how work on this might move forward, and how people can get engaged really in that one?
Oh, that's great. Thanks for that question. And yeah, I mean, what we're trying, the coalition is doing, serving as kind of that coordinating or convening entity. We're certainly leading some of the action streams. So Ocean Week Canada would be a good example, or establishing the micro grant program for communities. But number 8 is a great example where we actually don't see the coalition, the National Project Office, as driving that one. So already after the launch of the national strategy, there's been established, which is great. It affirms kind of the momentum and, you know, buy into the strategy, but there's already been established an interdepartmental government federal working group on ocean literacy, which didn't exist before. So now we have people from Parks Canada, like the different agencies, Parks Canada, Fisheries and Oceans, Coast Guard, Environment Canada, Transport Canada, you know, all sending one representative to come together. They're meeting monthly, very early stages, hard to know where it's going to go, but that's certainly encouraging. And then, you know, the hope is that they will create some communication pieces out to the Canadian public so that we can get a sense of what they're identifying as priorities, how they're interpreting kind of the main pieces from a federal perspective around ocean literacy, their alignment with, you know, where they're seeing ocean literacy with some of the other, like Canada's great now creating a blue economy strategy. So we're really interested to see what they're going to identify as that point of intersection between our strategy and theirs. So that's hopefully, you know, one example, but what we've done is just, it's an invitation out to all Canadians, to anyone can sign up to be part of an action team. And we've had good uptake so far, you know, certainly of the 9 action teams, some are formed and running and others just have a handful of people so far and we'll be getting going. But you know, we want to keep to the spirit that this is a bottom up, you know, community driven effort in Canada. It's served us well so far. And I think, you know, it's essential in order to help kind of drive that change over the decade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great to hear that the response has been to develop a cross-governmental team. That's amazing. I mean, I think, again, that's something that we face challenges with, where different departments might say, well, that's not within our remit, so it's nothing to do with us. And we're like, yeah, but you talk about road infrastructure and you're on the coast, so it's kind of a little bit to do with you. So, you know, there's different things like that. I think they're so important. So it's great to hear that that's moving forward, early stages or not. It's great that that initiative has started and that those conversations are starting to happen. And also, again, you know, one of my areas of interest right now is really thinking about how ocean literacy, or whatever we just, you know, whatever terminology you prefer to use, how that does intersect with some of those bigger policy areas, or not bigger policy areas, but parallel policy areas like blue economy, like marine protection, whatever it might be. How can we use ocean literacy to kind of move some of those things forward? Because I think, you know, it's got a clear role to play for me in terms of the blue economy agenda, for example. So it's great to see that Canada's thinking about how those things might intersect with each other. You know, really interesting to see more about that as it happens. We have a question from Judy again, just asking, what advice would you give to a country that's just starting to understand ocean literacy? And what do you do with, I don't understand the last bit of your question, Judy. What do you do with what you knew before you started? Or what do you need to know before you started? What advice do you give to a country that's just starting, basically?
Yeah, gosh, these are big, tough questions. Yeah, I think definitely there's no need to start from scratch. You know, if there's anything that Canada's done or other countries that have done around this process that is helpful, like one thing we want to do is just package, you know, in a very accessible, succinct way, just lessons learned, so that, you know, and any resources or tools that we've created. And Emma, you and I have talked about that too. Like, you know, all of us are striving to try and figure out measurement frameworks or indicators of how do you measure ocean literacy beyond just a multiple choice around ocean knowledge. And so to be able to kind of create a, you know, a knowledge exchange, a space of sharing in this community practice such as this, where we can share frameworks used, resources developed, you know, templates for what we've done, or just have a chance to come together in webinars like this to share how we created certain tools or processes. We'd love that. So certainly not starting from scratch is key. But on the flip side, in order, I think, to get the buy-in and to really co-create something that's quite meaningful in the context of place, you know, there is no one formula that's going to work across, right? And it really is. And for us, we just started truly on the ground in community. Like to have, I think the best thing we did was to have the 5 regional coordinators who, although we were part of a national team, you know, and we co-created the tools, the data tools and instruments that we were using, I was kind of hands off to let the regional coordinators really move into the communities and regions and adapt as needed. You know, what in First Nation coastal communities, it wasn't interviews, it was sharing circles, right? Or like organizational asset mapping. Like, you just wouldn't do that with a First Nation community. You would go in and you would spend a day fishing and hear the stories, and then you would have to tease out from that, you know, and then feed it, send it back. Did I interpret this right? So a lot of different processes, but I think honoring and doing a place-based approach in whatever way that means in your context, I think will help ensure that collaborative investment that I think is essential to make any strategy have legs.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, so Judy clarified, sorry for not understanding, Judy. Is there anything you wish you knew before?
Yeah, how much gray hair I'd get in the process. I think I aged 10 years in the last 2, but yeah, there has been some things for sure. I think, you know, we knew it'd be a lot of work. We knew that we knew there'd be a lot of tensions, and that some of them aren't resolvable or neat and tidy. Like, in some ways, I think a lot of early work in ocean literacy, which I totally salute, and, you know, the US did a lot of great work in the early 2000s that we still build, you know, we built on their shoulders, and I acknowledge that great work for sure. But I think there's, yeah, I think part of it is that we know that with ocean literacy that it's just still nebulous for a lot of people, no matter how you try to articulate it, or a groundswell of engagement and collaboration. There's still people that kind of scratch their head as to what really is this. You know, for them, it either has to fit neatly in the box of education and youth, or, you know, some other way. So yeah, I think I knew that going in, but I didn't know how hard, like, even after this entire process, we're still having these kind of head scratching conversations with industry, for example. So yeah, I think maybe, yeah, I don't know if we could have known anything better, but just knowing there's a heck of a lot of work still to be done.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit managing your own expectations, isn't it? Because I mean, just you say about people not knowing. I mean, I've been working in marine citizenship, ocean literacy for 15 years, and people I speak to every day probably don't quite get what I talk about. You know, my mum probably doesn't quite understand it in some ways. So I think recognizing those challenges, and we've had conversations with people, or I've had conversations with people in kind of policy working groups where, you know, the term's been used quite regularly for the last couple of years. And I had somebody say, well, ocean literacy, it's just about education and communication, isn't it? And I was like, no, hang on, hold on. No, not quite, a little bit, but not quite. And they'd sat through me presenting it on it a couple of times. So I think it is important to keep going back to that message. And I think Diz, the point you made about not starting from scratch, you know, there's the work that the COLC have done, and the reports that are available, and we will share those with the alongside the recording. And also it's gone in for next month's MarSocSci newsletter, so the links will all be there for everybody to access. But there's also the work that's just recently been published from the UK that came out yesterday for World Ocean Day, for the recent report on England and Wales communities, and we tried to explore the different dimensions of ocean literacy through a questionnaire approach, but at least gives us some insight, and that's definitely been made open so that people can use those questions and know that they've been tested. There's some comparability, I suppose, if appropriate. I think we still have some work to do to understand that measure of success and how we evaluate that impact. What change are we actually delivering over the next 10 years? I think that'll be really important for us to have those conversations sooner rather than later. I know it's something we've talked about. There's a comment from Daryl who says, a truly excellent talk, many thanks, Diz. And it's more of a comment rather than a question, but just kind of recognises the importance of the point on terminology, and the fact that it's true for many aspects of marine science and management, including things like natural capital, ecosystem services, social value, societal benefits, ocean literacy. And actually, if we kind of keep getting too bogged down in the academic terminology and the academic phrasing, and of course that's appropriate for certain audiences, for certain areas and arenas, but actually if we keep doing it, we're not going to move things forward, is his point. And I think that's really what you were kind of saying, is that we need to just let some of that go and start going down the action streams, going down the activities that will actually deliver that change.
Such a great comment. And I fully agree. We get caught up in the language and rhetoric and discourse, that is often government and academic oriented. And that was one good lesson that was continually, evolving as we move through this process, is the need to let go a lot of that language. And the more we did, the more we learned, the more we heard, the more we, I think, just insight shared. The other piece I'll just add to that, because I think it is an extension of that, is as soon as we brought artists into the project, and artists went out into community asking similar questions, but as an artist would, like if you in the ocean were to sit, or you in a whale, were to sit down and have a conversation, what would be said, right? And it just opened up a whole other, and we still got exactly what we were trying to get to, and there was no use of any of that terminology that has been weighing us down for so long. So, I think just being mindful of that. And another example, that 2-minute video I shared, that was by, someone in their mid-20s, who we basically said, here's the national strategy, make it accessible. And
make it look beautiful.
There's so bringing young, really talented kind of creative storytellers, who have that multimedia skill set into the work that we're doing, and not at the end, but at the start. That has also really helped us out. Because we know, most reports aren't read, right? They're just skimmed. So I think, these are some of the things that we've learned along the way that have been really helpful.
I think that's, again, another fantastic point. I think I've been very encouraged over the last couple of years to see the growing recognition of the role and importance of arts and creative approaches, not just as a communications tool, but as a way of really understanding how people connect with the environment, and as a research approach. And I think perhaps it's been quite dismissed historically from a natural resource management perspective. And there's a real, well, at least from my circles, and I feel like I might sometimes speak in a bit of an echo chamber, but I think there is a growing recognition that it's really important, and it's got such value and lends such richness and depth to the conversations. And that was one of my favorite bits of the work you guys did, was really using those diverse tools to engage with different communities and to communicate the results. I think it's really, really important, because as you said, reports tend to sit on shelves and your friends might read them, but they might not get used as much as a beautiful video or an infographic or something that's much more accessible. So I think it's a really, really important point. Iski is just saying in the chat, in case you don't spot it, that she'd love to chat to you more about the ways that the using the arts-based work has approached. So I'm pretty sure you guys are connected anyway, but if not, I can put you in touch. Everybody, I am saving all the links that are going into the chat, and I will do my best to make sure they're all connected to the recording. We're coming up to just 6 minutes to go. So if there are any final questions for Diz, please pop them in the Q&A. It's been a fascinating conversation and some really great questions to kind of think about how we can, as I said, like really build on that momentum and that upswelling of interest around ocean literacy, regardless of what our views are of the term. It's gained traction, and we've got to move with that. We've got to make the most of that, I think. We've heard how urgent this action how urgently this action is needed. So we don't have time to keep talking about definitions. We've got to just get on with it, really, don't we? And I think that's really, really crucial too. I think that's what we've seen through the work that you guys have been doing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it's just, it's time to act, and there's no one single approach. So just creating that ecosystem of actors and actions is essential for sure. The other observation, I've noticed that, so much of the work that is the groundswell coming right now, and maybe it's just because it's the ones we hear about more, and certainly is more of a northern hemisphere or Atlantic, oriented. And there's so much in some of the journals issues and articles. We were really trying to dig and find some work being done in the Pacific and the Southern Hemisphere. And and some of also the orientations around just relationship with ocean, it was amazing. It just totally turned some of our thinking on the head, and just being mindful as we collectively go forward that there's still so much we haven't even actually collectively heard and shared and made space for. And, you know, I think so many of the ideas and solutions needed are out there. We just have to create more space to hear those and share those. So yeah, that's also a challenge and an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Hearing that diversity and getting those stories, as you said, is really crucial. I know there's some great work happening in different places, but we need to be open to hearing that. Absolutely. Well, with 4 minutes to go, I'm going to, I think, if there's no final questions, I'm going to say thank you, Diz, so much for such a fantastic session. It's flown by for me. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it, and we've had some really great conversation and really great questions come in from our lovely select group of attendees. Thank you all so much for attending. If any of you want me to put me in, any of you would like me to put you in touch with Diz, please just get in touch on info@marsocSci.net. And as I said, I've saved the chat, so I'll be trying to ensure all of those links go alongside the recording, which will be on our YouTube channel and also the MarSocSci website in the next couple of days. Diz, if there's anything else you'd like to send to include with that, then please let me know. But for now, thank you so much. Happy Ocean Week. And yeah, look forward to speaking to you again soon.
And thank you, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to be here today. It was great, and appreciate all the questions. Look forward to staying in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Diz. Take care. Thank you. Bye.